Welcome back for day 3 of the Blender Basics Bootcamp. Today we're going to finish modeling our trophy by adding some beautiful handles using Bezier curves and adding some text. You can make it say whatever you want. Mine says #1 Blenderer of all time. So let's get to it. My name is Chris Folia. I'm your stream scholar. Welcome to Stream School. Alright, now to add handles to our trophy cup, we're going to use an entirely different kind of object in Blender called a Bezier curve. So to do that, I'm going to zoom out to give myself a little bit more room to work with. I'm going to hit Shift A to bring up my add menu. I'm going to go down to where it says curve, and I'm going to select the Bezier. That will immediately bring it into the absolute dead center of our scene where our 3D cursor is, which means we can't see it right now. It's being completely hidden by our trophy cup. So to fix that, I'm going to go ahead and hit GX, move it right on over on the X-axis until it's visible, and click to set it in place. So now I'm going to hit period on my numpad to zoom into it. And as I rotate around this curve, you're going to notice that on the top, it looks like a nice curved line. But on the front view, it looks like a completely flat straight line. Now we want to work on this curve from the front view so we can create these really cool looking handles from the orthographic front. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this 90 degrees on the X-axis by hitting R, X, typing 90 on my keyboard, and then pressing Enter to set it in place. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit 1 on the numpad to go to my orthographic front. Then we're going to hop right on over into edit mode by hitting Tab on our keyboard. And you're going to immediately notice that this looks completely different from any other geometric object we've worked on in Blender in edit mode. What I mean by that is we have one point right here with 2 lines or handles sticking off of it. We have a curved line, then we have another point over here with 2 handles sticking off of it. Now in the previous video, I said that curves can't exist in 3D space without being made up of flat polygons. So what gives? Well, as you can see, this line is faceted and made out of flat polygons or flat individual segments, but this curve in a Bezier curve is controlled by the handles of these points. So if I select this point, for instance, and select this handle, now if I hit G to move it, you can notice how that sort of guides and defines the shape of the curve. Same thing happens over here. If I select this point, which will automatically select all of the handles involved, and I hit R to rotate it, that also guides the shape of the curve. Or I could even hit S to scale it if I really wanted to, and that will also guide the shape of the curve. And if you really want to get fancy, you can also select a point, select a handle, and then hit S just to scale that one individual handle if you really want to. So knowing the absolute basics of these Bezier curves, let's go ahead and try to create this cool handle curve shape right here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab my point. I'm going to hit G to move it right on up here next to the trophy. Click to set it in place, and you'll notice I'm not moving this right up to the surface of the trophy, and that's because this line is going to have some thickness when we're done. So next, I want this to be a perfectly straight up vertical line for my Bezier handles. So to do that, I'm going to hit S, Shift Z to scale on every axis except for Z. I'm going to type 0 on my keyboard, and I'm going to hit Enter, and that's going to give us a perfectly straight up and down line. So next, I'm going to grab our second point. I'm going to move that up to about where I think it should be. Click to set it in place, and zoom back in on it. And here, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to exclude the X-axis instead. So I'm going to hit S, Shift X, 0, and that will give us a perfectly horizontal line when I press Enter. And at this point, you'll notice that these handles are defining a curve that's a little bit too square for my liking. So to make a nice rounded curve, instead, we just need to adjust the handles. So I'm going to select this point, hit S to scale it down a little bit. Now I'm going to select this point, and I'm going to hit S to scale that one down a little bit as well. And that's going to give us a much nicer curve shape. But we only have 2 points for this curve. That's not going to be nearly enough to make this elaborate curve shape. So to add more points, all we have to do is extrude. So I'm going to select this point, hit E to extrude, and you'll notice that creates a point with the exact same handle configuration, but it also generates a new line segment for us. So I'm going to move this down until I feel it's in about the right position. We can always change it later. And here, I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees based on the view, hit Enter to set it in place, And now we can scale this up and just mess around with it to get the shape that we really want. And at the same time, I'm gonna push and pull all of these points to create a shape that I really like. So here, I'm gonna go ahead and extrude it again to make the next part of our handle. I'm gonna rotate this point, again, using all of the exact same hotkeys we've already covered. I'm gonna move this down right here, maybe rotate it just a little bit more so it's sort of parallel with this. It's tangent to the curve maybe. I don't know math terms. What do you think I am, a nerd? So anyway, I'm gonna take this point, I'm gonna rotate it out a little bit. I think that'll create a nicer curve shape. I'm gonna scale the handle up, and all this is me just pushing, pulling, and nudging the individual points and handles to create a shape that I like, and I expect you to do the exact same. So here, I'm gonna select this point, and now to create this spiral, I'm just gonna extrude it about to where I think it should be. Click to set it down. I'm gonna rotate it to give us that nice spiral shape, maybe something like that. And you're gonna notice that this gives us a weird kind of distorted oval shape instead of the nice circle that we have here. So for this, we honestly need an extra point between these 2 points. So to add that, I'm gonna go ahead and select the first point, hold Shift, select the second point, right click, and select Subdivide. That will immediately give us a nice new point in between these 2 points, but it won't change the overall shape of the curve, which is super cool in my opinion. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the middle point now. I'm gonna drag it around, rotate it, and I'm just gonna mess with all of these handles of all of these points to get the shape that I really want. And I'm thinking this is starting to look pretty cool. Oh, maybe something like this. And again, we can always change this later. Oh, I think that looks pretty cool. So finally, we just want to create this spiral end piece. So I'm going to select this vertex. I'm going to hit E to extrude it, move it to about where I think it should be, rotate it, and finally, I'm going to scale it down, maybe something like that. I'm going to select this point. I'm going to scale that handle until it looks just about right. So now that we have all these points in place, I might still nudge and move them around just a little bit more to create a shape that I really like. Let's add some thickness to our curves. So to do that, I'm gonna hit Tab to go back out into object mode, go all the way over here to the right. I'm gonna select the Curves Properties panel, which looks like this green sort of distorted backwards cursive C. I guess that's probably the worst way to explain that. Anyway, I'm gonna go down to the Geometry dropdown on the Curves Properties, click on that, scroll all the way down to where it says Bevel, and if that's not dropped down, you can drop it down. And here, the default option is round. So if I add some depth to that by clicking and scrolling on the depth slider, you'll notice that this is gonna give our curve some depth. It's gonna turn it basically into a really thick tube. It's a perfectly round cylinder going around our curved line, which that's pretty cool, but it's not quite what we're looking for to make a trophy handle. I think a more ergonomic trophy handle would be more of a rounded rectangle kind of shape. So to create that, we're going to use the object profile for bevel. What this allows us to do is we can create a completely different curve object and then extrude that along the path, basically. So let's go ahead and do it. So for that, I'm gonna go ahead and hit Shift A. I'm gonna go to Curve, and I'm going to add a circle. Then I'm gonna hit GX to move it over on the X-axis like we've already done. Set it into place just so we can see it. And now we're going to select our curve. We're gonna select the little eyedropper next to object, and we're going to select our curve circle. And wow, that's a lot thicker than we really want it to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the circle, hit Tab to go into edit mode, hit S to scale, and I'm just gonna scale this right on down. You can notice the one-to-one matchup of the thickness of the curve with our curve profile, which is this circle. So if I go to 1 for our orthographic front view, and I come up close here, I can scale this down about until it matches our colored stripe on our trophy. So here, I'm gonna go to the top view, and I wanna make our handle a little bit more of an oval shape. So to do that, I'm gonna select this point, hold Shift, select this point, hit S, and then hit Y to scale on the Y-axis. Just like that, we can create a nice oval, and in real time, that is updating the shape of our curve, which is so cool. So for this, I want this to be more of a rounded rectangle shape than an oval, but we do have a little bit of a problem here. If I select this point and hit SX, it's not gonna let me do that. And that's because by default, these curved circles come with the automatic handle type instead of the aligned handle type. Blender has a whole bunch of different handle types for these Bezier curves. So to change that, I'm gonna hit A on my keyboard, hit V to bring up the set handle type, and I'm gonna set these to aligned. So now if I select this point, hold Shift, select this point, hit S, Y, or SX, now we can scale these out on the X-axis to create more of a rounded rectangle shape. Then I'm gonna do the exact same thing on the next 2 points by selecting those, hitting SY, and scaling those out on the Y-axis. So this will give us a nice rounded rectangle shape for a handle, and you can see that being updated in real time on our trophy handle, which is super cool. So the last thing to do on that is to make this taper, because you're gonna notice our handle is one consistent thickness all the way down the length of the curve. And we don't want that. We want this cool taper where it starts small, gets bigger and thicker, and then it gets small again by the next end. So to do that, all we have to do is hit Tab to go out of edit mode, select our curved handle, hit Tab to go back into edit mode. I'm gonna hit 1 to go to orthographic front. I'm gonna select a point, any point that I want, probably the end one though, was what I would recommend. And I'm gonna hit Alt S on my keyboard, move my mouse in, and that will allow us to change the thickness of that individual point, like so. So we can go through all of the points and change the thickness of them individually, like so, or you can select multiple points and change their thickness at the same time. But I'm just gonna go through and hit Alt S on each of the individual points and give them thicknesses that I think look about right. Maybe something like that. And I think that's looking pretty cool. And while we're here, now that we have this with some thickness to it, we can see that our curve looks kind of lumpy. So it like kind of lumps out there and lumps out there. So I'm just gonna adjust the handles here to make my curve a little bit more appealing, I think. Just gonna scale this down, maybe even rotate this some and move it around just to give it a much nice rounder shape. You could honestly mess with this and finagle it forever and ever and ever and never truly be happy with it. At some point, you just gotta call it done. So the next thing you're gonna notice is that this curve, if I click on a point, hit period to zoom in on it, you're gonna notice that it's completely hollow. Now, we're not trying to make some budget, stupid trophy cup. We wanna use that premium solid material. So to fill in our end caps, all we have to do is go to our curves panel, go down to the bevel section, and where it says fill caps, you wanna make sure you check that, and that will fill in the caps and make sure our handles aren't completely hollow if somebody gets up close to examine them. So the next thing we wanna do is probably add this cool two-tone pattern like this. Now in Blender, if we just made our profile look like this for our curve, had like these sharp corners on it, we wouldn't be able to give this two separate materials. So we're gonna need to add an entirely separate curve handle object for that extra profile. But the cool thing here is we can have two curves that are exactly the same and then just use two different bevel profiles to get this offset. What I mean by that is check this out. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit Tab to go back into object mode. I'm gonna hit Shift D to duplicate my curved handle. I'm gonna right click to set it back into place. It still exists, it's just exactly overlapping our other handle, and I can prove that by hitting G to move it. Right click to set it back into place. And here we're going to create another bevel profile. So I'm gonna go ahead and select my circle, hit Shift D to duplicate it, right click to set it into place, hit Tab to go into edit mode. I'm gonna hit A to select all of the points. I know this is a whole lot of commands. I'm gonna hit GX to move it on the X axis, click to set it into place, and then I'm just gonna scale it down to make it a little bit different than our previous bevel profile. Maybe move this a little bit further back on the X axis so it's not quite so drastic. And then maybe select this point and scale it down just to round it out a little bit. So now I'm gonna hit Tab to go back to object mode. I'm gonna select one of our handles, whichever one gets selected first when you click on it. And here I'm gonna go to the object under our bevel profile, and I'm gonna hit the X. That will completely erase that and give us just a straight line for this object again. Here I'm gonna hit the eyedropper again. And here I'm going to select Bezier circle.001 instead of Bezier circle. So if I click on .001, Now you're going to notice we have a completely different bevel profile for this curve, which will allow us to give it a completely separate material when we get to that stage. And it also just looks pretty cool. It looks like an entire extra level of detail on our handle, which I think is pretty neat. So here, I'm going to hit 1 to go to the orthographic front, and let's go ahead and smooth out our curve just a little bit more because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. But to do that, we're now going to need to edit both curves at the exact same time. And to do that, we can just select the first curve, hold Shift, select the second curve, hit Tab to go into edit mode, and now if I click and drag to select a point and scale it or rotate it, that's going to edit both points on both curves. Now, there is a little bit of a tricky situation here. I can't just select one handle and move that, or else that's going to move only one of the curves. So to fix that, I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-A to deselect everything. You have to make sure you do that. Then I'm going to click and drag to select that point. And now we're going to use something called the box select tool. So if I hit B, that will bring up this crosshair right now. And by default, if I click and drag, that's used to select, just like the default selection rectangle we've been doing the entire time. But if I hold the middle mouse button, click and drag, that allows us to deselect. So now if I release, we've deselected everything except for these two handles. And now I can just move these two handles by themselves, but it will affect both of our curves, which I think is pretty dope. Oh, I'm going to move this in maybe something like that to make it a nice curve. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing down here. I'm going to deselect those 2 points and maybe move this down just a little bit to give us a much nicer curve shape. So at this point, we have one really cool handle on one side of our trophy, although it might be a little bit thick. So let's go ahead and fix that before the next step really quick. So to fix that, I'm just going to select the first bevel profile, go into edit mode, hit A to select everything, hit SX to scale on the X-axis. I'm just going to make this a little bit thinner. Tab back out, go into the other bevel profile, hit A to select all the points, GX to move it in a little bit, tab to tab back out. Now we have a little bit of a thinner handle, which I think is going to look a lot better. So now we have one handle on one side of our trophy. We ideally want another handle on the other side of our trophy, but we don't want to do a whole lot of work there, and we definitely don't want to recreate it. Now we could go to orthographic front, and we could just duplicate this handle, rotate it 180 degrees, and put it on the other side of the trophy. But that's pretty tedious, and if we make changes later, now we have to make changes to the other side as well. So Blender has something absolutely beautiful called the mirror modifier, which allows you to mirror an object over its origin. So you have two copies of it, but if you edit one, it's going to edit the other side of it simultaneously while you edit the original copy. So to do that, all you have to do is select an object, go to the wrench icon for your modifiers panel, select the dropdown, and go to mirror. And immediately you're going to notice that this is mirroring right across the origin of the object, which means the mirrored copy is ending up over here. So to fix that, we need to reset the origin of the object to the center of the scene. To do that, all you have to do is hit Control-A, that'll bring up the Apply menu, and then just click on Location. That will completely reset the origin of the object to 0, which means this will now be mirroring over the correct axis. So now we're going to do the exact same thing for the next handle. We're going to select it, we're going to hit Control-A, select Location, and then we're going to do Add Modifier, Mirror, and now we have two really cool looking handles on either side of our trophy. I'm going to hit Alt-A to deselect them, and we can rotate around to get a nice good look of this, which I think looks pretty cool. And again, the really cool thing about the mirror modifier is if I select both of these handles, go into edit mode, select the point and move it, now it's editing both sides of the trophy at the same time, which is awesome. So the last step of this tutorial is going to be to add some text to our nameplate right here. So to do that, Blender has a really cool tool. If you guessed called the text tool, you would be correct. So we're just going to hit Shift-A. We're going to add some text, and that'll bring it in right in at the center of our scene, just like it did with our curves. So I'm going to go ahead and hit GX to move it over on the X-axis, just so we can get a better view of it. Click to set it in place. And text is really cool in Blender, because if you hit tab to go into edit mode, it becomes just a regular text editor. So you can backspace to get rid of the text, and we can type whatever we want here. So my trophy text is going to say #1 Blenderer of all time. Then I'm going to enter for a new line. Then I'm going to type Chris Folia, just like so. Then I'm going to tab back out into object mode, and you're going to notice that this isn't quite centered and it's not the font that we want. And we can change all of those settings in the text options panel over here on the right. So if I click on the little green A, and then I come down to where it says paragraph alignment, I can change the horizontal alignment to center, and that will center it on the object's origin. Then for the font, I can go to the font dropdown, and I want something a little bit fancier, maybe like a Times New Roman or something that has those nice serifs on it. So if I click the folder, it's going to take me to C:/Windows/fonts. I'm going to scroll down until I find Times BD for Times New Roman bold. Right there. I'm going to double click on it, and now our text is Times New Roman bold, which is awesome. So the next step is going to be to put it on our nameplate here. And to do that, first of all, we want this to be centered on the x-axis. So I'm going to hit N to bring up our transform panel. I'm going to set the x location to 0, like so. Then I'm going to hit 3 to go to our orthographic right view. I'm going to hit G to move our text over here, and I'm going to scale it on down until it about matches what I think the width of this panel is. Finally, I'm going to hit G to move it down, and hit R, and I'm going to try to just basically match the angle of this nameplate. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, just has to be pretty close. Now, I'm going to move it on in next to the nameplate and see how well I did. I'm going to rotate it just a little bit more, again, using the exact same hotkeys we've always been using. So here, I'm going to drag it into the nameplate by just a little bit, like so, so we know it's going to absolutely be touching the nameplate when we extrude it. Now, if we go back to our 3D view, we're going to notice that this is a little bit close to the edges. So I'm going to scale this down just a little bit more, like so. And now I'm going to hit GZZ, or GYY, I guess, to move this just on its local y-axis and slide it along the plane that it's rotated until it's aligned just about perfectly. And here we need to extrude our text so it'll be visible. So for that, we just go back to our text panel, go to where it says geometry, we can click and drag on the extrude to extrude this just a little bit. And again, if you want to extrude this in smaller increments, you can hold Shift on your keyboard to extrude it in smaller increments like so. So I think that looks pretty cool. I'm going to zoom out, hit Alt-A to deselect everything. And now we have our beautiful trophy cup. We have our text on our nameplate, and we have these awesome handles. There is one final thing I want to cover here really quickly before we end the tutorial, and that is you're going to notice that this handle looks a little bit faceted. It looks a little bit jaggy, as you can see. It looks even more so if you look in wireframe, and you can see these sharp faces. So to up the resolution of that curve, we can do that in the curves panel. So I'm going to select the curve, go to the curves panel, and here I'm going to change the resolution preview up to something maybe like 24. And you're going to notice it's going to look a lot smoother. Or if I drag it down, we can make it look a lot jaggier. This just ups the amount of faces that are used to extrude around the curve, so it looks actually curved instead of jagged. So I'm going to set that to 24. I think that looks pretty cool. I'm going to select the other curve, also set that to 24, and I think that looks pretty cool. So in the next part, we're going to create a really basic trophy case to actually put our trophy in, but until then, I'll see you in the next video. At this point, you should have your trophy entirely modeled and a pretty good understanding of how to use curves and text in Blender. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but I want to encourage you to explore here. Mess around, have fun, and come up with something that is truly yours. If you found this video useful and want to stay tuned for day 4, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. I'll be releasing these basics videos on a daily basis for the duration of the course. And if you want to come hang out with me live, I'm live at least every Friday over at youtube.com/oraclefish. Also, if you want to download my example files or just support what I do here on the channel, make sure you check out my brand new Patreon, link in the description. Until next time, my name is Chris Folia, I'm your stream scholar, and class is out.